Welcome to Stories of Hope, a podcast addressing the very real issue of suicides in the Army. Listen in on conversations with soldiers who have gotten help and shared their own story of hope.
Welcome to Stories of Hope. And ladies and gentlemen, this is where we will focus on a very serious topic of suicide and suicide prevention. My name is Lieutenant General Gary Brito, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, more commonly known as the G1. But today I'm coming to you as a concerned, caring soldier, a leader, a father, a husband, and a father of a soldier. And as with many, I'm here humbled to serve. And as your moderator today, and as we talk soldier to soldier, person to person, with a wonderful person who has agreed to share their story of strength and resilience, and an accomplished leader in our Army as well. So over the next half hour or so, we will take the opportunity to talk to our guest and learn about his experiences and share his stories. With us today, we have Sergeant Major Thomas Campbell. Sergeant Major Campbell is the Operations Sergeant Major for the United States Army Center for Initial Military Training, more commonly known as CIMT. Sergeant Major Campbell has agreed to tell us his story today and lead us in some conversation. Unlike many soldiers, and especially non-commissioned officers, Sergeant Major Campbell has deployed many times over the years and clearly has survived numerous firefights and I'm sure many other experiences over his multiple deployments. But with all of that, there was one instance where he escaped death that drives him the most to be an advocate for soldier health, soldier resiliency. And today, he has offered to share his story with us. So Sergeant Major, sincerely, I know this isn't easy talking about this, but I really do appreciate you doing that for all of our soldiers and civilians in the Army. I can't thank you enough for having this conversation.
Thank you, sir. It's a great honor for me as well to be able to share my story and maybe help somebody else out that's on the ledge, sir.
No, and it certainly will, Sergeant Major. So with that, Sergeant Major, I'd like to turn the mic over to you. Just have to tell your story. Let us know what you were going through at that time, what you may be thinking about now. And again, I've seen that just hearing this from everyday people, and especially leaders of your stature, would be helpful, could be helpful to those on the net. So with that, I'm going to go mute and turn the mic over to you, and thanks, Sergeant Major.
Thank you, sir. There was a lot of factors that played into me going to the point of suicide. And a couple of them off the bat. One, I think the biggest issue was I was in a very high tempo unit that was doing back-to-back deployments. And then in that unit, I was a rifle company first sergeant. So I was always in charge of people, and we were redeploying and resetting and gearing up for the next deployment. And so we were very active and very busy. So then I ended up redeploying. Well, actually, I'm in Afghanistan, and I get selected for Sergeant Major. So I redeployed to Alaska. 2 weeks later, I head south to the Sergeant Major Academy. And in those 2 weeks that I was back, I find out that I have a 20-year marriage. It just went down the drink. And I have an estranged relationship with my kids. And I went from a perfect credit score to finance issues and a very bad credit. Now I'm heading south by myself, and I'm idle. I don't have anybody. I'm not charging anybody. Nobody's really in charge of me. And I'm very bitter. There's some other things that was going on with me too, sir. Like I was having these migraine headaches. I didn't know what was triggering them, but they would hurt so bad that I couldn't move. And so then I started self-medicating. I thought Jim Beam was a pretty good doctor, and I found out he wasn't a good doctor at all. But then the old saying, an idle mind is the devil's playground. It is. And that's what started setting in motion everything. I started thinking about the soldiers that I'd lost over the deployments. I started thinking about decisions that I made that cost both lives and also health. Then I start thinking about the failed marriage, the strange relationship with the kids, and the alcohol didn't help whatsoever. But that really hadn't driven me to suicide yet, but I was above getting help, because if I go get mental help, they're probably not gonna make me a sergeant major. And then all the other myths out there of I'd lose my top secret security clearance, I would limit my ability or what I can do in the Army, just all those myths out there of why not to get help. So I had an episode in class one day, and I stormed out of the room and told everybody where they could go, and it wasn't anywhere nice. And I went home and started drinking. And the commandant of the Sergeant Major Academy at the time had found out about my little episode in class, and so he called me and had set me up with a mental health appointment. And then I had to go see him. And when I went to mental health on Biggs Army Airfield, that poor lady that I saw, if I ever saw her again in my life, I'd get on my knee and apologize to her, because I went in with an attitude of something I had to prove that I didn't have PTSD. And I made such a spectacle of myself, she refused to be in the room with me because she feared for her health. And so when I went to see the commandant, he said something to me that registered. And he had my ERB on his desk. He said, out of these deployments, how many NCOs did you force to get help? And that's what registered, because I'd always instilled in my leaders to lead by example. And I have a self-epiphany that, you're showing the same signs you looked at in your guys. The same guys that I did force to get help, but somehow I'm above. So I go back to mental health to give this an honest effort. And a couple psychiatrists later, Miss Pierce picked up on the TBI and asked if I had ever been screened, which no, because I didn't have any holes in my head and I thought I had all my marbles in there. And so she set me up with a TBI clinic on Fort Bliss, and they did MRIs and all these mobility tests and memory tests and what have you. And the outcome of that, I find out that I have a bruise on my front left lobe, which happened right before I deployed. I fell off a cliff and a rock smashed me on the head and knocked me out and had smashed my ACH, or my helmet. But the other problem was inside of that bruise, I had about the size of a 50-cent piece of dead tissue where I had an aneurysm during one of my brain injuries. And what the doctor said was the migraines was happening when I try to spark those damaged neuropaths, and the bruise would heal itself, but that dead tissue, just dead tissue. You're going to have to learn to live differently, because that tissue's never going to grow back. And that is what broke the camel's back. Is now, on top of all that other stuff I just talked about, in my mind, I'm retarded. And they're not going to promote me to sergeant major if my brain's not right. They're probably not going to let me stay in the Army. And I've done this my entire adult life, and I have no clue what I'm going to do, because there's probably not a big job market outside of the Army for people that's not mentally stable or their brain's not functioning. And so that is when I decided that I could take care of my kids better by ending my life. And all the problems that I was facing, I was the common denominator, and they were all my fault. So that's when I decided it was time to off myself. But I didn't want to just put a pistol in my mouth and shoot. I didn't want to jeopardize my kids getting the benefits. So I studied and researched and tried to figure out a way to kill myself and not jeopardize. And I came up with, I need to make something look like an accident. And so I found the perfect place in El Paso, where the Trans Mountain Road comes down out of the mountains. and right before it gets to the bottom, it makes a sharp left curve, and there's these picnic tables with rock walls on the end of those tables holding the sunshade. And it was the perfect place. It looked like I just ran out the road and hit smack one of those walls, and that would end everything. And everybody just thought I was being silly on my motorcycle. So then I go out, and so I rehearsed it. And once I had a foolproof plan, something that happened, we don't really talk about suicide, is I had a sense of relief. That because I knew, I mean, I still had some stuff I had to do, get in order for my kids. But once I got that stuff in order, I knew that once that day came, all of my stress would go away. And so when it came to execution day, though, I went to the top of the mountain, and I had that motorcycle coming down that mountain as fast as it would go. But between the time I went up and back down, somebody parked a car between the curve and that rock wall. And so somehow I got the motorcycle under control, went around the curve with the tires smoking. And then I go back up and I pull on the side of the road where I can wait for the car to leave. And that's when the phone in my pocket started to ring. But I didn't answer because I'm on a mission. And eventually it quit ringing, and then it started ringing again, and I didn't answer. And this happened about 3 or 4 times. And finally I answered the phone, and the person on the other end of that phone was a little girl that I had met. She just had this weird feeling that she needed to call and check on me, see how I was doing. That little girl actually talked me off the mountain that day. And later on, she would become my wife, and she's my wife now, Teresa. But when she talked me off the mountain, though, that is when I had a self-epiphany that I've got to go back and I got to get a hold of this stuff. And so I go back to Miss Pierce, my psychiatrist, and with a whole nother slew of issues to try to deal with on top of what she was already helping me deal with. And but one thing was the TBI clinic had gave me some medicine, some anxiety medicine, some medicine to make me sleep, some medicines to make me quit bouncing around like an idiot, another medicine help my headaches, but I didn't take any of it because I didn't want to be stuck on pills, and I didn't want to. But Miss Peters, she finally was level with me. She said she wouldn't see me anymore if I didn't start taking the medicine because it was pointless if she doesn't. I mean, that medicine isn't just to drug me up; it's to get my chemical balances right and what have you. So I started taking my medicine, and what I found out is life's not so damn bad. And my emotions started changing. I quit being bitter at the world. I quit being angry at everybody. And life turned out really good. But then even after that, sir, I'll tell you, for years, I was ashamed that I even got to that point. And I never shared this story with nobody. And Teresa, I mean, I was having one of my off days, and it was a pretty bad day. And Teresa, she's been my rock, and she helped me get through that day. And that night, she started planting the seed that maybe I ought to share my story. And maybe if somebody can see a sergeant major, who still got promoted to sergeant major after all this, and all that stuff I thought would happen didn't happen. Maybe I could help somebody else out. But I'll tell you, sir, through this whole ordeal, the one thing that I would like to share is the hardest part of getting help is walking in the door. And I was so far off the deep end that I was put into the intense inpatient treatment. And I'll tell you, walking in that door was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it's the best thing that I ever did for myself was walking in that door. And I was dropped off probably about 50 feet from the door. It felt like 5 miles. That door was the heaviest door I've ever pushed open in my life, but the best thing I've ever done for myself.
I'm at lost words. I want to say wow, but more thank you for that heartfelt story. Just really a heartfelt account of what you've gone through, and I don't know how many will hear this story. Hopefully, many of all ranks and duties. But what you just offered, I can't imagine one what you've gone through, but how helpful it will be to those. Sergeant Major, if I may, there's something you said in the beginning of your comments that being a person who's been in uniform for several decades, just as you have, and I'm sure others as well, that have found I've often thought of myself. And if I can remember the exact words, how you weren't in charge when you were on your way down to Sergeant Major Academy, not in charge of anybody, nobody in charge of you. Could you talk through that time period? Because if we rewind it just three to 4 weeks ago, you were in charge of people, somebody was in charge of you. How did that work in your behavior, your thoughts? Because I can, just from changing jobs myself, as many in the audience, I'm sure, sometimes have to wrestle with that with a leader of so many stripes like you have.
Yes, sir. It was, and I'll tell you, I mean, when you're in a high tempo organization, and especially our high performers in those high tempo organizations, a lot of times it's hard to see issues, and those issues get suppressed. And I think that's what was my problem was, not that I'm a high performer, but it was just a tempo that we had faced over I'd lived over the last 6 years. To all of a sudden, immediately, it's just me. And then also take the family away from me too. That's when, I was lost. And I just started thinking about all the stuff I could have done different that maybe would have made the situation different. And I'll tell you, sir, one of the survivor guilt issues that I had was my medic that got killed in Iraq. And he was on that, I let him go on that patrol when he wasn't supposed to be out there. And the reason he wasn't supposed to go out there, he was leaving that night because they were waiting for him to get home to induce labor to his wife for their first child. And that was one of the things that was hard for me to forgive myself. Because at my point where I was at in my life, if I had I died, it would have, I'd lived a complete life. I had already accomplished the goals that I had set in the Army up to that point. And the circumstances behind Sergeant Baum's death was that he was killed by a sniper that I had been chasing in Karma, Iraq. And the bullet passed through Doc Baum's throat and impacted the ground right underneath me. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that what happened was Louis, who was the sniper, made the common mistake that snipers make. And this is only grown up as a sniper. And he burned through to the target. And he didn't see Sergeant Baum in the way. And just that, it affected me. He was not any more or less important than any other person we lost in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it just affected me the most for just because of how he got killed, why he got killed, and the circumstances. And I can remember the drive from Alaska to Fort Bliss. For whatever reason, that was on my mind the entire trip down there. Why did I let him go? But It's a long way to answer that question, sir, but I think it's just more of a culture shock of always answering the mail to all of a sudden there's no mail to answer. And that's what lets the idle mind start playing tricks.
No, not a long answer at all, Sergeant Major. I'm sure many can relate and understand that. And what you made me think about is possibly the value of reintegration when you come back from operations like that. Sergeant Major, something else you said, which I found very inspiring, actually, and that was my words, perhaps a turning moment of when the school commandant talked to you. And my guess is there's many other ways you could have dealt with it. But could you share that experience with us, that moment? Because then it was senior NCO to senior NCO.
Yes,
a turning moment.
I will. And what happened, I mean, I made a huge spectacle of myself in class. I told everybody to off and stormed. I left my books on the table, just stormed out of class, got on the motorcycle, went back to my trailer and started drinking. And when the word had got to the commandant of what happened, and he made the appointment for me, and then I had to go see him. So after I got done with my appointment, I've got a chip on my shoulder. And I went I knocked on the door to his office, and he brought me in. Now, I was expecting to get my butt handed to me. If I was the commandant, I would have handed me my butt. But when he brought me in and he told me to have a seat, and I sat down in his office, and he didn't raise his voice or anything to me. He held up my ERB and he pointed at he said, out of these deployments, or no, let me back up. He said, he goes, do you know why I made you go see mental health? And I said, Roger Sergeant Major, to see if I have PTSD or not, because I told Sergeant Major to go in the rest of the class. He said, well, no, I mean, that wasn't professional. He said, but no. And that's when he held my ERB up, and he said, out of these deployments, how many NCOs did you force to get help? And I didn't answer him at first because immediately I started thinking back to the NCOs that I forced to get help. And I'll tell you, I mean, both of those guys, I drug out to my truck, kicking and screaming like a school kid, and drug them into mental health, kicking and screaming. And both of them were upset with me for doing that up front. I would find out later that both of them had a plan with a timestamp to end their lives. So that's what kind of triggered me was I need to lead by, I mean, I've always led by example, and I've always told my junior leaders to lead by example. If you have to tell me how good you are, I don't want you on the team. But if your actions show how good you are, I want you on the team. I need to really knuckle down and give this an honest effort and practice what I preach.
No, thank you, Sergeant Major. And I would like to share the emotions in your voice. It's satisfying because I can see how you have cared for soldiers and care for soldiers now, which is, it's cornerstone to the strength of our Army, foundational. So I personally really appreciate that, as I'm sure many would. And I think your intervention with those two non-commissioned officers you mentioned might have turned their lives around. So definitely something to salute you on and feel great about. So Major, if you are using the interaction with those two NCOs, what would you tell somebody today that may not know they're thinking about suicide? You said you saw these NCOs had a plan, but it wasn't outwardly showing. What would you share with someone when you see those moments? And if you could rewind or really fast forward from where you're at today.
Yes, sir. So here, what I found out, especially through my experience, sir, is one is, I think, and this was, I mean, this really came relevant with a suicide that I just recently dealt with at the Drill Sergeant Academy, is once there's a plan made the signs go away. There's no signs left because there's a sense of relief that I talked about earlier where there's nothing to see. And in my case, I was suicidal before I knew I was suicidal. And what I mean by that was when I was self-medicating with alcohol, I would get drunk and I would do stupid stuff that I had no recollection that I ever did. I would hear from other people. But at that same time, not even with the alcohol induced, was at that point in my life, I did not care if I died. And I did a lot of stupid stuff, like when I-10 would turn into the I-10 parking lot in the afternoons in El Paso, I would weave through cars at 100 plus miles an hour on my motorcycle because I did not care. So for those out there, one is if you see yourself start going down that slippery slope, one of not caring, the other one of just doing stuff that would be categorized as stupid stuff, you might want to take a look and get help. And then those that know people that are going down that same way, there's three things, and I'm glad you brought that up, sir, because one is don't be afraid to intervene. But I would tell you there's three things. If you do intervene, there's three things that we really don't talk about out there that I found out over all the suicides that I've dealt with. One is if you intervene, shut up and listen. Just listen. Other one is do not make it about you. What I mean by that is even if you have experienced the exact same thing that other person is experiencing, there's a time later on to share your experience. But at the point of intervention, that's not the time. It goes back to rule one, shut up and listen. And the last thing that we really don't talk about is you own that problem till it's not a problem for that other person. And with over the years of suicide training that we do, we talk about if you intervene, stay with the person, don't leave them alone, seek professional help, be in the chaplain or ER or mental health, and then we quit talking. And I would tell you, one of the most detrimental things you can do is get them to help and then walk away, because they've probably opened up to you and told you things they've never told anybody else. And now you walk away and abandon them, you're answering the mail on whether or not anybody really cares or not. And I'll give you an example of that real quick. There's an NCO right now. 2 years ago, he was in my brigade. When I was down at Fort Stewart, 188th Brigade, and he was one of my senior NCOs, and he was having a crisis moment. And I ended up was the one that intervened in that. He was drunk at his house, had been drinking 2 days. When I got to his house, he was in his living room in his underwear with a pistol in his hand. And it took a while to talk the gun away from him. And then I put him in the truck and I drove him to the ER because it was a Friday night. And being he was drunk, of course, they put him in the drunk room and he had to sober up before they bring a psychiatrist in to talk to him. So the psychiatrist didn't make it in until Saturday, the next morning. But because I was the one that took him there, I had to stay there with him. And the psychiatrist, when they finally talked to him, said, yeah, he probably should not go back home because the issue was at his house. And probably should not be left alone. There's somewhere I can put him. So I took him home with me. My wife made him some food to get some food in his belly to absorb some of the alcohol. We put him to bed. And that evening when he woke up, we sat out on the porch with coffee. His Sergeant First Class started opening up to me. And I will tell you, sir, this guy is the poster child of resilience. The stuff this guy has endured, and he's still a very professional and outstanding non-commissioned officer, is amazing. After that talk, I talked to him. I made a point to talk to him every day. And I got him help. As he started working through his problem, those phone calls, and then I PCS out of Fort Stewart and I go to Fort Eustis. I still call the guy. And 2 years later, he's on, I mean, he's doing a lot better now. And I don't talk to him every day, but about once a week. And in fact, on Fridays, if I haven't called him by 1800, he's probably going to call me now, because now we've that's become our time to talk. And we don't really even talk about his problem. We just talk. Sometimes he asks for advice, whatever he's dealing with his soldiers now or whatever.
Sergeant Major Campbell, that was so powerful. I couldn't write fast enough, and I just can't thank you enough for those three nuggets, and then how you lived it and how you shared that with us. So, quite frankly, I like the old school way of just shut up and listen. That's very powerful. And then how you shared it, don't make it about you, which may be something that several leaders struggle with. But I've heard that even from my own family sometimes. This isn't about you. And the last point you brought up, I think, is so spot on. And I could actually kind of connect that to up-tempo and stuff sometimes, how they own it until it's done and take it to completion. And then you gave a great explanation and illustration of that. So thank you. Those are three nuggets that I'll personally remember for some time. Wow, Sergeant Major. Hey, Sergeant Major, could you, if you were in a position to talk to leaders and soldiers today, what message would you give them about, you talked about paying attention to indicators and seeing things and gave some great examples of that. So if you could touch on, whether it's in leader training or at a Sergeant Major's Academy, an LPD somewhere, which I know you've done several of those, what would you say? What do you think is working, not working? And hey, guys, and here's leaders, this is how you can tackle this and help people.
Yes, sir. So I'll tell you, and actually I'm going to talk about that here in a few hours here at Fort Lee with over here at the Ordnance School. Here's what, and this is what I've seen, and this is from sitting on multiple suicide review boards and dealing with suicides and their self and reflecting back on my experience that I lived, is one, and we've trained over the years to identify the signs of suicide ideation. And that list, I mean, depending on who's giving the class, what that list looks like. I will tell you is every suicide that I've dealt with and even or reviewed, one is, and I'm sure you can attest, sir, I mean, anybody that knows anybody that kills herself, the first thing that we ask ourselves is, what did we not see? And it's natural. And I think, and the reason why it's so hard to talk about suicide, I mean, that's the one thing that the only person you can really blame is the person that committed the act. And and a lot of people say, I mean, it's a selfish act, and I'll tell you, sir, it's not. In my case, it was a selfless act, I thought. Here's what I would say, sir, is if you look for the signs, you're probably too late. But to build those personal relationships, you've got to gain the trust and confidence of your peers and subordinates. One, for them to talk to you. And to do that, there's three things that you have to have. One is you've got to be open and available. If your peers and subordinates have to schedule an appointment with three different people to get to your office, you're not open and available. If they don't feel comfortable, if they can't approach you when you're out looking at training or trooping the line, you're not open and available. But on top of that is you've got to be honest. And as soon as you break that honesty, you have lost the trust and confidence of both your peers and subordinates. And that's one thing that's hard to build back, if you'll ever be able to build it back. And the last one is, and this is where it's hard for a lot of, especially our senior leaders, is you've got to be transparent. And transparent is being able to share your experience. Because I would tell you, sir, I guarantee you that there's a senior leader that's going to listen to this that's probably been on the fence on whether or not I need to get help or not. And I would tell you, for those leaders that are trying to figure that out, get the help, because it's going to pay more than one dividend. One, help yourself, but the other one is you're just as vulnerable as your subordinates are. And you owe it to your subordinates to take care of yourself if you're going to take care of them.
Well, certainly it's going to be more than great LPD, but I can see the conviction in your voice, and this is even more powerful because of your personal experiences. Open and available, honest, maintain trust, and be transparent. And I think all of that, and I really, really like what you said about the personal relationship with peers and subordinates, and I'll extend it to soldiers as well. And you know as well as I do that really gets to the cohesiveness we need, cohesiveness, dignity, and respect. So there's nothing. That's just amazing. I really appreciate that, Sergeant Major. Sergeant Major, there's nothing I could say that's more powerful than what you said today. And I really do hope, as you said, there's a leader or even a new soldier that will listening that will gain something from this. So before I make final comments, I'd like to give the final mic moment to you to see if you have any concluding remarks. And again, Sergeant Major, I can't thank you enough. I'm glad you're in our ranks still. I want to give a public thank you to your wife, Teresa, as well, which is clearly, as you well stated, I think we all say we have a better half, and she's been a strong suit for you as well. So I'd like to give the final mic to you, then I'll take it from there. But again, thank you, Sergeant Major.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for this opportunity to be able to share the story. And, you know, sir, I mean, what you said during the introduction is, it does. I mean, it does take a lot of gas out of, I mean, whenever I do public speaking engagements and what have you. I would tell you there's therapy in that. And so for the leaders out there, and not just leaders, soldiers too, is if we want to get past the stigmas, and this is what I would close this out with, sir. If we want to get past the stigmas of mental health, leaders have got to share their stories, and they've got to get out and talk. And you know, sir, I did this. I did an LPD one time, and I talked about that in particular. And a couple of weeks later, I was waiting on an elevator, and when the door opened, there was a 3-star general. I won't say his name. There was a 3-star general that's getting off the elevator. When he saw me, he stopped. He said, "Major, can I talk to you real quick?" Yes, sir. He goes, "Hey, I listened to your LPD the other day." He said, "It really hit home because I experienced a lot of what you talked about, and I was on the brink of ending everything, and my wife was the one that actually talked me off the ledge. So I could really connect with what you said about your wife." He said, "But I have never told any. You're the first person I've ever told that to outside of my wife." He goes, I wanted to share my story. I haven't figured out how to do it yet." And so for me, that was one humbling, and it drove that point home. Why do I do this? That is exactly why I do this.
Yeah, Sergeant Major Campbell, man to man, leader to leader, husband, father, and father of a soldier as well. I really, really, really appreciate spending some time with you today, and for being an advocate for our soldiers, which I can tell you love. Period. So thank you for that, and I really hope, and I know that this time today and your future LPD and future sessions, and just being a leader out there is going to help many. So I very much appreciate that on behalf of our Army. And for those in the audience that are listening, and as a Sergeant Major, I think illustrated well for us today, if you feel you need help, seek help. No stigmas, no stigmas at all. And I encourage you to call the military crisis line at 1-800-273-8255 and press the number 1, or 1-800-273-TALK and press the number 1. And if easier, we can text as well at 838-255. And it's free and confidential, and you'll have the right people at the other end 24/7 to assist. Again, Sergeant Major Campbell, thank you so much. We are out of time now, but stay tuned for future episodes of Stories of Hope. Again, proud to be part of a great team. Thank you, Sergeant Major. Everybody, enjoy your day. Thank you.
Stories of Hope, Brought to you by the Army Resiliency Directorate and the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel.